My screen. All right. So I thought we would talk today about what you could do for a winter landscape to make it more interesting. We are on the first full day of fall this year, or right now. Today is the first full day of fall, and fall is a great time for planting. So if you think about it, spring, if you plant in the spring, those plants immediately go into our summers, which tend to be have a lot of drought, be very hot. And so the plants really have to be established or very they need a lot of attention during the summer because they really haven't had a chance for their roots to set in and to be able to support themselves. But if you plant in the fall, especially earlier in the fall, like have everything in before by Halloween, those plants have a chance to get their roots in the ground, and then they have the spring, which is usually wet and more friendly to new plants, to establish themselves before they then go into this drought, hot, dry time that we often have in our summers. So with that in mind, I thought about recommending plants to consider to make your winter landscape more interesting. A lot of us go into hibernation mode when we are in when winter is approaching, and don't really think of our gardens as spaces that we can enjoy in the winter. So my thought is to share with you some ideas of how you could make your winter garden more inviting, and maybe you might actually want to come outside in the snow and the cold to explore it. The Ambler Arboretum, of course, has the Albright Winter Garden, which features plants that have seasonal interest in a time when people don't usually think about going in the garden. So we have flowers blooming in there from Halloween through Easter. So you can come in October, November, December, January, February, and find something in bloom. The flowers may not be showy, but often they're fragrant. So the garden is filled with scent that might surprise you in a winter landscape. Additionally, the Arboretum has a lot of plants with a focus on multiple seasons of interest. And that's because if you think about the way a semester goes and the fact that we're an outdoor classroom at a university that has horticulture as a major and landscape architecture as a major, our spring semester starts in January and ends the last week in April, basically. So in some cases, some trees don't even have leaves on them yet, and we need to teach plants. And our students are on campus that time of the year. And so we have a lot of plants on this campus that are great for multiple seasons of interest and for late fall, early spring, and winter interest. So I encourage all of you to come and take a walk around to be inspired about to see what you can do in your landscape. So with that, we'll get moving on. So when we think about winter interest, a lot of us gravitate towards or automatically think about evergreens, and evergreens are a lot of times they're conifers. So conifers or coniferous plants are plants that get cones. Here you see Pinus parviflora glauca, which is a Japanese white pine, very soft blue-green needles and these leathery cones, and they're really interesting and beautiful all times of year. We have a dwarf conifer garden here, which you may have visited. It's the Calabrero Conifer Garden, and that's another place to go and visit for inspiration about winter interests. So evergreens are definitely an option for winter interest, right? And so with all the varieties that are out there, you can get a lot of different textures and shapes and colors in a garden just using evergreens and coniferous plants. And so that's always an option. But this talk is going to focus on actual flowers and some other considerations for winter interest beyond evergreens. Before I started working here and inherited the Calabrero Conifer Garden, I used to dismiss evergreens as just sort of green blobs in the landscape that didn't change very much, and you only knew what the weather was basically as if they were wet or if they had snow on them, and otherwise they really didn't change. And even though they don't get flowers, and that I think there's an opportunity with the right selection and diversity of plants to have very interesting color combinations. Some change color in the fall. Some of our, some have very interesting cones and reproductive structures that are really cool colors. So there is a lot of opportunity there. But if you just have a single type of evergreen, you might not be getting all the interest that you can if you consider different plants. So here we have blue spruce, you may be familiar with. This is Picea pungens. And then on the right is Cryptomeria japonica, the Japanese cedar. So those are two options. You just see the nice color and texture combinations there. So even if you're thinking evergreens, think of different colors and different textures to bring into your garden. Again, so here is on the right and the left, there are two different Chamaecyparis or false cypress, or some people call them Hinoki cypress, or gold mop cypress. So there's two, and then in the center is a dwarf blue atlas cedar. So again, just notice the variety in colors and textures that you can have here. So don't be drawn in by this hedge or this, just boxwoods or inkberry hollies, the broadleaf evergreens or hollies. Really think about all the opportunities out there with color and texture combinations when it comes to your winter landscape. And it also helps with the landscape the rest of the year too. It adds that diversity and interest. So here we have another false cypress, another Hinoki cypress, and then the gray is actually called gray owl. It's a variety of red, eastern red cedar, Juniperus virginiana. So you can see again, just that combination with evergreens. And then in our gardens, we tend to have broadleafed evergreens also. So here we have a rhododendron. You might have mountain laurels, cherry laurels, Pieris japonica, the Japanese andromeda. You might have any of those. Broadleafed evergreens or hollies are another example. So these are plants that have wide leaves on them, but hang on to their leaves in the winter. So our evergreens that have needles like these, they're adapted to the cold. They don't drop their needles when it gets cold out, and they have very thin modified leaves that we call needles. And they are that way because they have adapted to hang on through the winter by reducing the surface area of the leaf. 99% of the water that a plant takes up is lost through its leaves. And in the winter, more water often isn't available because it's frozen in the ground or is falling as frozen precipitation. And so it's not immediately available to the plant. So evergreens with needles have reduced the surface area of their leaf, coated it with a waxy coating to prevent that water from escaping in the winter months. Usually there's wind in the winter, drying winds. And our broadleaf evergreens, they are also adapted to reduce moisture loss in the winter. And so we may see things like this in the landscape. And so what I want you to do too, in addition to thinking about diversity of color and texture in the landscape in the winter with your plant selection, is also reconsider what is interesting about your landscape. So in this case, this is a process called thermonasty, and it's spelled just like it sounds. And it is a natural reaction of broadleafed evergreens to curl their leaves to protect the stomates, which are the pores on the underside of leaves that lose the water out of them, to stop them from losing moisture. So it's completely natural. It's not a water loss. It's not wilting or anything like that. It is just this plant protecting itself from losing all of the moisture. There is a product out there called Wilt Proof, which is like a waxy spray that you can coat the leaves of rhododendrons and other broadleaf evergreens with to prevent this process from happening. But my point is, if the plant's already doing it for you and protecting itself for you, why spray something on it, to prevent that? You probably wouldn't protect the plant as well as the plant can protect itself. So just think of this as the plant's way of showing the season and something interesting and some change that it's doing throughout the year. Even if maybe you don't think it looks that great, but it's a plant doing what it's supposed to be doing at this time. If you drive up the turnpike towards the Poconos in the winter, you'll see all the rhododendrons look like this when it's really cold and really dry out. They're just, and then after it rains or it gets sunny and it warms up and it's not so windy, the leaves will open up. And so they just go back and forth protecting themselves. So I think that's fascinating. I love to see it in the garden. So just another thing to think about. And then I encourage you also to think about leaving seed heads in the garden. So we know if we leave seed heads, they might seed in, and we might get more plants of those the following year. And so that can be problematic, can be kind of weedy. But if we leave seed heads, we also might feed the wildlife. And if we're planting native plants specifically, the whole point of planting native plants is to support a diversity of wildlife. And by removing the seed heads in the fall, we remove a food source for that wildlife that we're trying to support by planting native plants. And seed heads can be interesting in their own right. They can be beautiful and add a different kind of dimension and texture and color to a landscape. So some people might think it looks like it's unkempt, or you haven't been paying much attention or giving much care to your garden. And some people think in the fall, you just clean out your garden. You just do a wholesale, cut everything back. And that's the very wrong thing to do in your garden. When you do that, you eliminate a lot of places for beneficial insects to overwinter, places for birds to hide out, seeds for them to eat, that kind of thing. So really, it's better in early spring to do a cleanup after the temperature gets above 50 degrees or so than it is to do a fall cleanup. If you don't do a fall cleanup, you'll notice many more beneficial insects helping out your garden in the spring. But you also get these cool textures. So these are, I believe, pycnanthemum here, so mountain mint, and these are seed heads. You notice the brown and the gray here, and then this is a sea of them. So this was taken on December 19th, and this is just a place where beneficial insects can hang out, where birds, not only can birds eat the seeds out of the seed heads, but they also use this dense mass of planting as shelter and protection. So say you have a bird feeder nearby or something, they can go in there when they're feeling threatened or to eat and then go back, because a bird feeder is can be a very open, exposed place for them to hang out. So if you want to leave habitat like this for them so they can feel protected. So this was taken in February. This is Meadowbrook Farms. You probably are familiar with it. So, sorry, I'm just moving you all. So here, even an empty container is a focal point of interest. So don't feel like you have to bring everything in. I mean, of course, you can put plant material or dried material into that, but just as it is, it looks beautiful. And then using symmetry and the formality of the space and leaving the dormant plants there really still makes it a beautiful spot to look at. So you can design your gardens with dormancy in mind. What are these plants going to look like when they go dormant? So a lot of people will cut back grasses when they start to look like this, but welcome that change and leave them as habitat and leave them as seasonal interest in your garden. You don't have to cut everything back, and you actually shouldn't cut everything back in the fall. And I just love these grasses alternating with the red twigs of the shrubs, and how the grasses sort of waterfall over and soften the edge of the bluestone patio in the winter. I mean, things feel pretty harsh in the winter anyway, so to have this softness is really, I think, a nice addition. And then you can even think about, once you know plants really well, you can even think about how you can combine, or how the plants look in combination when they're dormant, or how in their winter look. So this was taken in January. I tried to take pictures at the correct time of the year so I could show you what these look like. This is in the Arboretum. It's a color combination that's in the Arboretum. These are the papery old bracts or infertile flowers of Hydrangea arborescens, which is smooth hydrangea, the native one. And they've fallen into the dark purple winter hues of PJM rhododendron leaves. So PJM rhododendrons are spring flowering. We have one that's flowering pretty well right now also. They're evergreen, but in the winter, their leaves change from deep green to this beautiful maroon color. And oh, it's just so pretty, this purple maroon color. And this combination really struck me as beautiful. And it was completely unintentional, but it's something that I would replicate again, knowing how beautiful it looks in the winter. So I always say when people go to a garden center, whenever you go to a garden center or a nursery, the plants on display are at their most beautiful. They have the berries for the season or the flowers for the season or whatever it is at that time. And I want you to look at that plant and ask it, what else do you do? You know, what are you going to do for the rest of the year? Sure, you look nice now, but I don't have a great big space. So what else are you going to give me? And look into it, see what it looks like in the different times of the year. If you don't cut it back, what its dormant state looks like. And can you garden with that in mind as well? So we have the dormant look, and then we have plants that are bred intentionally to be beautiful during the winter months. And so this is Cornus sanguinea, the winter flame, and this this is in the Arboretum in the winter garden. Notice the backdrop of in this case it's Leland cypress, but it's an evergreen backdrop. So when you're thinking about winter interest and what you can highlight, a lot of these plants really benefit from something solid behind them, whether that's your house wall or a hedge. It really brings out the colors in the winter. Snow will do that too, but we don't always get snow. But this does get brighter as it gets colder, and it looks like a bonfire next to this. We have one on either side of this bench, and it's so bright with its oranges and red and yellow coloration on the twigs. It's just amazing. It gets white flowers like typical shrub dogwood does, and but it's really, you plant this for this display in the winter. So not only can you think about what the plant looks like when it's dormant with its leaves and its flower remnants and that kind of thing, you can take into account twigs and bark for winter interest. So here we have, this is Acer palmatum sangukaku. So this is a Japanese maple known as the coral bark maple. And it has these chartreusey yellow leaves, Japanese maple leaves. It's an upright Japanese maple. And after it loses its leaves in the fall and the weather gets colder, these branches turn brighter and brighter pink or coral through the winter. And then they're just this mass of coral branches that you see here. And this also looks stunning with an evergreen backdrop, or when it snows, it's just really beautiful. So again, just take into account what else this plant will do. And evergreens don't have to be needled evergreens. So we talked about broadleafed evergreens. So you have hollies, mountain laurels, rhododendrons, you know, all of those that you can include, but there's also some perennial evergreens that you might want to consider. And so here's an example, Polystigma acrostichoides. So this is the Christmas fern. This is evergreen. So in case you're wondering how to know which one is Christmas fern, I'll tell you how I learned it in school. So you see these individual little fronds here. They have they're shaped like this. And so my teacher taught me thumbs up for Christmas. So you'll find these growing wild around us, and they are evergreen. So they add that nice texture and color to a winter landscape. So not everything has to be needles or shrubs, right? So here it is. This is in my yard, actually, Christmas ferns with all the other things that are growing in my yard. Another one, this was taken December 19th. This is Waldstenia fragroides, the barren strawberry. So it is evergreen. It can turn maroon in the fall. It doesn't get an edible fruit, but it is a native evergreen ground cover that you might consider using. There's not a lot of evergreen ground covers that are native. And so this is one, it's definitely underused in the landscape. It's not, you know, super showy, but it does stay green, and it can work as a living mulch, a green mulch in your winter landscape. And then there are sedges. This particular one is, this was taken in February. This is Carex plantaginea. This is the seersucker sedge, named because the leaves resemble the fabric, seersucker fabric, but also evergreen through the winter. There's blue sedges also. This is Carex laxicolmus. This was taken in February also. These two were in my yard. And just stays a beautiful blue color. And these two in combination, this sort of yellow green and this blue, planted in mass close to each other, really adds nice texture and color combinations through the winter. So just different ways to think of evergreen. And then we have exfoliating bark. And this is another way to add this beautiful dimension to a winter landscape, to add winter interest. This particular tree is Pinus bungiana, the lace bark pine. You can see how it grows upright. It's not a huge growing pine. You don't see it around a lot, but the bark is beautiful. The camouflage exfoliating bark here in greens and yellow greens and yellow. It's just really stunning. So thinking about bark is another way to add interest here. So you're probably familiar with this plant. This is Betula nigra. This was taken in January. This is here at the Arboretum, but Betula nigra, the river birch, is another great plant, multiple seasons of interest. So it gets a great yellow fall color, and then it has this bark that's just beautiful year round and this papery exfoliating. Some people think it looks sick or that it's dying because the bark is falling off, but that's what it's supposed to be doing. It's an adaptation, a protective adaptation to kind of remove anything that might be hanging on the bark over the years and just get rid of it. So, but you have this salmon color tan, kind of a pink color there. And it's called river birch, but they really do tolerate all kinds of conditions. In fact, these plants, because they are generally found in riparian zones where they can be flooded or dry out significantly, they are adapted to a wide array of conditions and do just fine in a variety of conditions. The nice thing about these two is, unlike the birch trees that have the white bark, which you may want to put in, a lot of people want the white bark birch, the European birches, those get birch leaf miner and bronze birch borer very bad, and so they tend to be short-lived and high maintenance. River birch doesn't get either of those, so can go away from the white bark birch and get the river birch, and it's disease and insect resistant as well. So this one, I feel like every garden could probably put one of these in. So another native with very interesting bark is Caria ovata. This is our shagbark hickory, and our shagbarks, I think this one was in Evansburg State Park, but our shagbarks are very large trees, great for wildlife. They get the edible nuts on them. And then they also have this great bark. It doesn't really exfoliate, but it lifts up off of the trunk. And that's where it gets its name, shagbark. Beautiful yellow fall color. They get to be big shade trees, very tough trees. And not only is it interesting, but it provides habitat. So moths and even bats will overwinter in the flaps on the bark. So you're providing more habitat and more diversity support when you include these. They are tougher to find in the landscape because they have this taproot. So they're harder to transplant when they get older. So you will find them smaller in nurseries. So another plant with really interesting bark is Stewartia pseudocamellia. So this is Japanese Stewartia. It gets these big flowers that look like fried eggs, so white petals with a big yellow center on them. And that happens in the early summer. And then you have this beautiful exfoliating bark and this very smooth trunk that almost looks like mussels. It's fluted like mussels are. And as they age, it just gets more and more stunning. And there's different types of Stewartia. The Stewartia pseudocamellia is one of the best for exfoliating bark, though. And then, of course, there's fruits, right? So we can think of what these plants will do and if these fruits will be persistent through the winter and be there as ornament as well. So here we have American holly, Ilex opaca, with its red fruits. Now, keep in mind that most hollies are dioecious. That means that there's male and female plants. So if you have a holly and it's not getting fruit, it is either a male plant or it's a female that doesn't have a pollinator close by. So that's just something to keep in mind. So you want to plant multiple hollies of the same type or an equivalent pollinator when you do plant hollies, if you want to have the fruit for ornament. And so I've noticed with American holly, the berries usually stick around through the winter, and then late winter, early spring, the birds find it. And when they're really hungry or they're coming back from their migration, then it gets eaten. So you usually have the berries there throughout the winter. This is Ilex verticillata, taken in December. Here at the Arboretum, you might recognize that's the wall of the Red Barn gym behind it. And these are actually some of the last to get eaten by the birds, I think, because they're hidden. The birds don't notice them because of the red wall, and they're kind of camouflaged there, but they persist through the winter. There's different cultivars of Ilex verticillata, of winterberry holly. So you can get these red ones. You can get the species, which you would find out in the wild, which has smaller fruit, or cultivars that have bigger fruit. Again, if you're planting natives to support wildlife, make sure you include the species that has the smaller fruit, because the birds are adapted to that. When you have bigger fruit, a lot of birds cannot eat those fruits. They're just too big. And then we have orange fruit variety. This is called winter gold. This one, the birds don't touch. They eat all the red berries first from the gardens all around the Arboretum before they'll even touch this gold one in the winter garden. But does provide interesting color through the winter. Then they kind of shrivel up. This one's taken in January. So then they'll start to shrivel up and fall off as the winter goes on. One plant you might not be familiar with, but is pretty cool, has really neat fruit. So I took this picture. This was in November, this fruit. This was on the Perkiomen Trail, the rail trail in northern Montgomery County. Just growing wild, but this is Euonymus atropurpureus. This is American wahoo, and these are the fruits of that. So if you're familiar with burning bush, that's Euonymus elatus compactus. That's a dwarf burning bush that a lot of people have in their landscape. This is a cousin of that. So it gets really nice fall color, and then it is followed by these fruits, which are this pink color. Here you can see the great fall color on the leaf here. And then there's really interesting fruits hanging on. So this one you would need to probably get from a specialty garden center that specializes, or nursery that specializes in native plants particularly. But it does sucker. And if you're familiar with hearts a bursting, that's another native Euonymus, similar, but later fruiting and this will still have fruits hanging on it in the winter, where the other one doesn't tend to do that. So this is Hawthorn crataegus. And again, I think this was in February. This is at Phipps Botanical Garden in their parking lot. You could see the giant thorns on it, but the fruits persist through the winter, and it gets white flowers in the spring. They don't smell great, but it does have white flowers in the spring. Nice fall color, and then these great fruits that hang on all winter and are edible by the birds. So sometimes fruits hang on through the winter and the birds don't eat them until they go through a bunch of freeze thaw cycles, because that's when they become sweet or palatable enough to eat. Before that, they're too astringent or not ready to be eaten. And so these will hang on for a while. So you can think of, there's trees that gets fruits, there's shrubs that gets fruit. So just think of the layers in your landscape and how you could add winter interest into all those layers. But we're really here to talk about flowers, right? I wanted to tell you about the flowers that you can include for your winter landscape, and that you can include flowers. So my first, I use real job after I graduated from college, was working in Newark, New Jersey, in an environmental nonprofit organization. And I was responsible for 14 school gardens around the city, and then eventually a 1.5 acre teaching garden that was right in the center of Newark, New Jersey. And it was my goal, because I got to design all the gardens. It was a teaching garden. I got to pick the plants and manage all the horticulture there. It was my goal to have flowers blooming 12 months out of the year, and it's totally doable. And we have that going on here at the Arboretum as well. It's not so easy if you just want to use native plants, that's much harder. But if you don't want to use just natives, you expand your palette beyond natives, not invasives, not plants that are problematic, but just non-natives, you can certainly have something blooming in your garden every month out of the year. And so I'm going to go through some of them and tell you when I took these photos so you have an idea about timing. But these are Iris reticulata, netted iris, they're called. They're Dutch bulbs that you plant just when you plant all your other, if you plant daffodils and tulips, you plant these at the same time. You can order them from bulb companies, but they come up very early. And this was taken March 1st, this particular, but they're in full bloom. You can see they're already up and there's a bunch of them blooming. So they had been blooming since February. One thing I will encourage you to do too in your landscape, especially if it snows in the winter, is take a look and see where your snow melts first. And that usually is a nice, warm, protected area. And so if you plant bulbs there, you can get them to pop up and bloom earlier than you might have them bloom in other places. So take advantage, that's a microclimate. So take advantage of those microclimate areas to extend your bloom season. So I love snow. I live for snow. I love to see snow. It would be fine with me if I didn't see flowers and just saw snow all winter. Like, I love it. But if you're like my mom who hates snow and wants any little glimpse of like colorful life to assure her that the world hasn't ended, you can do that. Take advantage of the microclimates and extend your bloom time. So just take a walk around after it snows, see where it's melting first. That's usually the hottest, sunniest spot in the winter. We have crocus that bloom here sometimes in January because we have this really warm wall. And people just love to see that. For them, it's a sign that spring is on the way. So here's the example of the crocus. So you see the little crocus here, you all are probably familiar with that. Again, in our microclimate, we can have crocus blooming as early as January in the warmest spots in the garden. And then also here are species tulips. So they are very low to the ground. They're more like, when you see the term species tulip, that means that they're more like the wild tulips that our tulips are hybridized from. So tulips are from, I want to say, Turkey. And so when you would go out and see them blooming in the wild, these tulips are more closely look like that than they do like the big Darwin tulips, the big ones that we're used to planting. So they look a little different. Some people might not even realize they're tulips, but they tend to bloom earlier. And at least in our case, it's weird. The deer don't bother them here in the Arboretum. I'm not sure why, and I'm not making any promises, but they don't seem to bother them. So also taken March 1st, but we're blooming in all these that I took March 1st, we're blooming in February. So this is Aranthus hymalis. This is winter aconite, very small, just about the height of your thumb from the ground, bright yellow with this collar of green leaves around them, and they naturalize. So that just means that they spread slowly over time to form this big clump or mass of them. And very nice to see these, one of the first ones to come up. And the deer don't bother these. Most animals don't bother these. They're toxic. So rodents and all of the other critters that tend to bother bulbs don't mess with these. So you can actually interplant these with some of your other more desirable bulbs to help keep the critters away, because these are toxic. They'll tend to stay away from these. So we have more spring bulbs. You all are probably familiar with the spring bulbs. Snowdrops are some of this was taken in February 20th. And of course, it depends on the season and the winter and all of that, but these are very early blooming. They're called snowdrops because they can kind of pop their way up through snow cover, but very intricate, delicate little flowers. A lot of these plants, they face down and you have to kind of get up close to look at them to appreciate their beauty. So Galanthus nivalis, the snowdrops, are another option for early blooms. And then if you have the right conditions, you can include one of my very favorite plants in your garden. And so this is Symplocarpus fetidus. This is skunk cabbage. And these are the blooms of skunk cabbage. And this was taken March 11th, but they start blooming in February also. But you need a wet area. They are a plant that needs a swamp. They need a wet, low area, not a pond or They need a swampy, wet area. And you'll see skunk cabbage swamps all over the region. The leaves get enormous, like 3 feet large and just wide, shining leaves. But before that, preceding that, are these flowers. So these skunk cabbages are known for warming up the temperature, the ambient temperature around them up to 30 degrees. So they can warm the air 30 degrees warmer than the surrounding air, and they will actually melt snow around them, which is just amazing and a reason to include them if you have a swampy area in your yard anyway. But they do thermogenesis, so they create their own heat, similar to how we create our own heat. They use through chemical processes, they create their own heat as well, and they attract pollinators to this warm flower where they get pollinated, and then the insects hop from flower inflorescence to inflorescence, warming up and pollinating along the way. They have this great maroon color. Usually when you see this, it means that they don't smell great. They're replicating some sort of roadkill or rotten meat or dead animal or something for the flies and beetles to be attracted to, but they still look really cool. And we have a few on campus here, skunk cabbage areas. So again, blooms in February, really interesting to check out. So maybe you don't include this in your landscape, but definitely scope it out when you're out for a walk in the winter. Hellebores, also very known for providing winter interest. So these are perennials, non-native, and toxic. So the deer don't bother these. There's no rabbits or, nothing seems to bother these. And the black flowering hellebore here was taken in December, and the white flowering one, that photo was taken in January. So there's a wide diversity of hellebore species and cultivars that will give you very interesting colors, leaf shapes and leaf textures, and bloom times from November through Easter. So those are ones to consider, but don't just get any old hellebore. Make sure you're getting different ones to expand the interest in the season. This was taken March 1st. Of course, this is in full bloom, so these were blooming in February also. This is in David Culp's garden. He's known for his hellebore collection. If you ever get a chance to visit, it's in the Brandywine Valley, a private garden that gets opened up sometimes. So more obscure flowers that people don't think of are, this is red maple, Acer rubrum. So this is red maple flowers. People don't think of maples as flowering trees, but they are, and they're some of the earliest to flower in our region. And it's nice for people who want to see flowers. It's not super ornamental in the way that we think of having big flowers as being ornamental or showy, but they are flowers in winter. And they actually, this one is April 10th. So this was blooming right around the beginning of spring, so late March. And the other important thing about this is one of the best plants that you can include for early season pollinator support. So honeybees and native bees that are out and about love this plant because there's not a lot flowering at this time that they use. And so this is a great plant to include for that reason. This plant has these red flowers, gets a great red fall color. So good multiple seasons of interest on this and good wildlife support for the shade tree. So somebody had a question about digging up the snowdrops that they've spread or naturalized through the area, and they want to dig them up and move them around. And yes, fall is a great time to do that. So you absolutely can do that now. It's the perfect time actually to do that. All right, so here, another winter interest. So this is magnolia. This is Magnolia solangiana or saucer magnolia. These are the bud scales. So another suggestion is just to take into the details and appreciate what is out there that could provide some seasonal interest while you're walking around a winter garden. So these buds are so fuzzy and so soft. They're just incredible. Although this one he looked like he had extra fuzzy scales, and he kind of reminded me of Baby Yoda, this bud I don't know why. Probably says more about me than anything. But this was taken in December. And the fuzziness on these buds is protection. So this is a flower bud. So that flower is hanging out through all the elements through winter. So it's developed a very thick scale and very coarse hairs to protect it from all the elements. And then the flower will open, of course, in the early spring before the leaves come out. So some trees that offer multiple seasons of interest in winter, multiple times. So this is the bark of Protea persica, which is called Persian ironwood. If you want to see some great examples, there's one here down by the pool house in the Arboretum, nice size specimen one. And then also if you ever visit Longwood Gardens, at their entrance to the visitor center to the right, there's a beautiful specimen of Protea persica there too. So it has this great exfoliating bark, sort of in a camouflage pattern. And then the flowers bloom in March. So they have these maroon flowers. The buds are really cool. They're super fuzzy. They're like perfectly round, super dark, super fuzzy buds that stick. They're very evident on the branches. And then these flowers open. The flowers don't have petals, but they open. This is related to witch hazels. And so they open up into this maroon and green flower. So a lot of the plants that bloom in the winter are very fragrant or don't have petals, or a combination of both, because if you think about it, they don't have all the competition with all the other plants for pollinators, and then there aren't a lot of pollinators out, so they have to use maybe fragrance to get out in the air to let the pollinators know, hey, there's something blooming over here, or make it easy for pollination and not have all these petals and things in the way, so that these insects who are already cold and out when it's cold out aren't wasting all their energy. So there's a lot of neat adaptations. This is Camellia japonica is another plant. So this is getting more into late winter, early spring to mid-spring. So Camellia japonica, if you have a protected area, you can consider this for planting in your yard. There is a fall blooming Camellia sasanqua is the fall blooming one that blooms in November. So, including both of those, you could expand your seasonal display, and but they need a protected spot. They are getting better with cultivars and hybrids that are more tolerant of our cold temperatures, but you want to be sure that you're purchasing them or giving this a nice protected area. Again, look for the places where your snow melts first, and that would help you find the warmer spots in your landscape. But you could have fall and late winter to spring blooming evergreens there. This was taken in February of 2017. This is Edwarthia chrysantha. This is another plant that is on the cusp of hardiness here, so it needs a protected area. And these are the buds, so the flower buds. So you can see how silky and smooth and gray they are. They're really interesting, and they're fairly large, like the size of a quarter, and so they really stick out. They almost look like flowers in and of themselves. And then here, this is what they open up to. So this is at the Scott Arboretum. The flowers have opened. They're very fragrant. They still sort of hang down a little bit, but they bloom before the leaves emerge. And here's what the shrub looks like overall. It's a relative of Daphne. It's deciduous. It's a rounded shrub, and flowers in late March or early April. And oh my goodness, the fragrance is just amazing. But this protected area, see how it's in a little courtyard here. Ours is in the winter garden in a very protected spot. It's really important. A very tough winter will kill the buds on this. In fact, last year was the best year I've seen it flower since I've been here. And the years before, I've been here a little over 5 years, and the years before it, we got almost no flowers at all, because the cold temperatures had killed the buds. So it does need that protected area. But it's really stunning. And there's an orange one and this yellow, and it just smells really good too. So Mahonias, this is Berberis aquifolium. Oregon grape holly. This has really interesting foliage color in the winter. So this is bright green for the rest of the year. And and then during the winter, it turns this beautiful purplish maroon color. And then when it gets warm out, it greens up again. And so you can consider when you ask that.
See this from Mary Franham?
So when you ask the plant in the garden center, what else do? You can find out about if it changes leaf color. In addition, a lot of plants do winter bronzing, it's called, and that's what this is. And so some people don't like that. They want their plants to stay green all the time. But if you think about it as seasonal interest and change, you might be able to plan in combination, right? You're planning your dormancy display using this. And then this is how it flowers in the early spring. So it flowers in late March. Fragrant flowers. Insects love this one too. And here, this is taken in November. So this is Hamamelis virginiana. This is our native witch hazel. So our native witch hazel that grows around here in our woods blooms in October, November into December. And then there's Hamamelis vernalis, which is native to the southeastern portion of the United States, and that blooms in February and March. So by adding a couple of native species of witch hazel, you can increase your floral display also. Now, these aren't all super showy, but you still have flowers blooming in the winter. This is Hamamelis mollis. This is not a native. This is an Asian species of witch hazel. This was taken January 25th, and you can see just in full bloom right in the middle of winter. If you want to see a really interesting display of witch hazels and all their variety and go at different times of the winter to see them blooming, Morris Arboretum has a great collection of those. We're working on it, but here we are. This is Hamamelis vernalis. So this is the native to southeastern United States witch hazel. This was taken in February. The long strappy flowers here, a nice fragrance. If you get close to them, they smell good. And they also support bees. So bees don't hibernate especially honeybees. They'll come out on warm days and go explore. And so if you have these flowers available to them, they can come and get the pollen, get nectar from these plants and take it back to the hive, which is helpful for them as they go through the winter. This is Hamamelis gelina. This is gelina witch hazel, which is a intermediate. It's Hamamelis ex intermedia. It's a cross between two different species of witch hazels. And it's a pretty popular one, has these bright orange flowers blooming. But so here it is. I just wanted a water drop picture in here. And then here it is again without the water drops. But we have this blooming in February in our winter garden almost every year. And on warm days, the honeybees are just all over it, like countless numbers of honeybees on it. So February flowers. And then this is Hamamelis vernalis. So a hybrid or a cultivar of the southeastern native. And this one is called amethyst because it has purplish flowers. So this one you can see here, the Arboretum. Another shrub with really early flowers is Coreopsis. So there's a number of them. They're called winter hazels. So the last ones we were looking at are witch hazels. And these are winter hazels. And they have inflorescence. They have drooping panicles of flowers. Also very fragrant, this light yellow color on these. They're so pretty. And then we have Chimonanthus praecox. This was taken in January. This one, we don't have this one in the Arboretum, but this was taken at the Barnes Arboretum. Just another yellow flowering, very early shrub that is perfectly hardy here. So you could grow it here, no problem. Again, you don't see these at just regular garden centers. You have to go to specialty places, more of more place where people are really interested in plants and diversity and really unique plants, you can find these, but not at your average big box store or something like that. So that was late January. Dirca palustris, this is leatherwood. This is a native that you don't see a lot, but also flowers early in the spring. You can see the leaves are just starting to emerge. You can see Dicentra blooming back here in the background as the ground cover. That's a native bleeding heart, and this is blooming just around that time. So this is a late and mid-spring, early to mid-spring flowering plant, but really interesting. Another Mahonia, this is leather leaf Mahonia, Mahonia bealii. This is February when this was taken, so you can see the flower buds here. Again, open up yellow, very fragrant. The leaves sort of look like holly. They do stay green. These do not turn that purple color that the Oregon grape holly does. These stay green, but the yellow flowers are a little bit earlier than the Oregon grape holly. Osmanthus looks like holly. It's another shrub, non-native flowering shrub, looks like holly. It blooms in November. So this picture was actually taken in January. For some reason, this had some flowers hanging out even in January, but usually it flowers in November, and they're not super showy flowers, but they do fill up the garden with fragrance. The whole entire garden is filled with a scent. And so when you're thinking about winter interest, if you're thinking about including some hollies, that's great. And I encourage that. But if you like the look of hollies, you might think about including some osmanthus. They're not eaten by deer. They flower at a different time of the year than hollies do. They don't get berries, but they do have this fragrance and these flowers in the fall. So it's a nice addition. Viburnum ferreri, this was taken in January, so it's just starting to bloom. These typically bloom a little more towards March, but they will start poking flowers out in February. This is winter viburnum, very fragrant flowers, and then they emerge, here's it in March, so it's fully open here. So another type of viburnum, again, not native, but maybe something to consider, not been shown to be invasive in any way. And interesting leaves, the leaves emerge maroon after the flowers, and just really cool shrub. These were taken February 16th, and this is Erica exdarliensis, the winter heath. And so heaths and heathers are wonderful additions to the landscape. The leaves look like little needles, but they are herbaceous plants. They're not woody shrubs or anything. And then they have these flowers on them, and these bloom from November through April, and then they stop blooming, but they bloom all winter. We have flowers on these. So just by including these in your landscape, you can say you have flowers all winter. The trick with these is they're very particular about where they want to grow. So ours are on a berm, well-drained soil. They do not want wet feet at all. They don't want to be soggy in the winter. So that's where they like to be. So if you have a sunny, dry spot that's well-drained, this plant can be for that space. If you want to go see an amazing display of these, the cloisters up along the Hudson River in New York has an amazing display. It's a heath and heather garden, so I highly recommend you going and visiting it. And you get to go in the winter and see all these flowers surrounding you, which is pretty great. Sarcococca hookeriana nana, this is sweet box. This is a ground cover, and doesn't get more than 2 feet tall, spreads by underground rhizomes, forms a dense mat. At the Arboretum here, we don't have to weed it, we don't have to mulch it, it just stays nice. The deer don't eat it. Big fan of this plant. These are the flowers. Those are in the axils of the leaf, and notice no petals on these at all. But this was taken March 1st. These were blooming in February, and the entire garden was filled with their fragrance. It is just incredible. So if you include osmanthus for November and this for February, you have just the garden filled with scent at a time you don't think it should be. This is just the leaves, frost covered, but you can get an idea of how dense the ground cover is on this. It's just slowly spreads. You have to get a little bit of time, but it's a great plant. underused, I think. It does want shade though. It does not want to be in full sun. This has to be in shade. If you put it in full sun, it does not thrive and it turns yellow and it's not great. Jasminum nudiflorum. So again, you can see all the flowers on this blooming. This is in the Arboretum along the Dixon path. This is been blooming since January. We find the first flowers coming out in January on this. And the buds are even really beautiful on this. They start out red and then they open to these yellow flowers. No fragrance on this. Bright green stems and these clear yellow flowers are a sure welcome sign that spring is on the way. And this is one that you can take advantage of those microclimates too to get it blooming even earlier. Lonicera fragrantissima. This is fragrant honeysuckle. So all bush honeysuckles are considered invasive somewhere. And so this may not be one that you want to consider for your landscape. It's a non-native shrub honeysuckle. However, the flowers are really beautiful and this smells just like Fruit Loops and it blooms in February. So if you're familiar with the way Fruit Loops smell, this is exactly that. So they describe it as citrusy, like a lemony citrusy, like the lemon rind kind of smell. So if you don't want to plant it because it's a shrub honeysuckle, you can come and check ours out. We teach it. We have it here on campus. We haven't seen it spreading, but it has potential for being problematic. So just be aware of that. And then there's this, we do not have this one. This is on our wish list. This is Abeliophyllum disticum. This is white forsythia. It flowers earlier than forsythia. And I'm not a big fan of forsythia. They take up a lot of space and they only look cool with their flowers for like a week, maybe two, and then they just really don't do anything else, in my opinion. This fits that category also, but if you're looking for something different and early flowering, same habit as forsythia. And then this plant I learned when I started working here, I just became enamored with it. This is Salix gracilla style of Mount Aso. So this is a Japanese pink pussy willow. If you're familiar with pussy willow, they usually have gray catkins. This was taken in February in full bloom. And then here's the flowers. So this was taken early February and then again in early March. So you can see this is the same plant. And you can see how the catkins change over time as they mature. Really interesting display, floral display on this. And it's a willow, so it grows almost anywhere. It thrives, doesn't need a lot of attention. You need to cut it back. It has blue-green roundish leaves, which adds another dimension of interest to the landscape in the rest of the year. So this is one of my favorites for including for winter interest. It does like the sun though. I planted in my yard. It does not like the shade as much. So, and then we have this guy who lets us know that spring is back, right? That his spring is coming. And this is in a lot of cases who we're planting these for if we're focused on native plants. But these are all plants, hopefully, that will add interest to your landscape in the time when before the robin comes back. Although we know that there's a bunch that hang out, robins that are residences here or migrate to here. But we this was March 31st. So with the start of spring. So hopefully by the time that your spring flowers come up, you'll have already enjoyed a bunch of winter flowers, or this has given you some inspiration for when you do your shopping to do fall planting, to think differently about what you might include in your landscape and when you might be out there visiting it. So thank you all. I hope to see you in our winter gardens. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But thanks so much for coming to the talk today. I really appreciate it. Let's see, we have share where we can find the recording of this presentation. I am not sure. I'm sure Erin knows where you can get the recording. Parodia persica, little difficult to keep from creating a colony via suckers, but the bark and full. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the fall color about Parodia is just amazing. Yes, you're right. Make it worth the struggle. It's interesting, Mary, ours has not colonized at all. So interesting. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope you all have a great rest of the week and a good weekend, and we'll hopefully see you at the next talk.
Hi, everyone. I will send out an email with the link to the presentation that'll be on our YouTube page. So you will all have that. And I will also send out the upcoming Temple Talks so you can sign up for them as well. So thank you, Kathy.
Thank you so
Really
much.
appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you later.